Thank you all for being here. My name is Libby Bennett. I'm the Director of Development and Communications at Groundworks Collaborative here in town. We operate our community's shelters for people experiencing homelessness, and we offer a broad range of services that include food, shelter, and supportive services. We aim to meet basic needs with dignity, working with people and systems to create solutions to end homelessness and hunger in our community and in our region. I'm honored to be here today to introduce Tracy Kidder and Robbie Gamble. Tracy Kidder is the author of Rough Sleepers, the inspiring story of Dr. Jim O'Connell and his team, who in the mid-1980s created Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, a medical system for unsheltered people experiencing homelessness on the streets of Boston. The program continues today at an impressive and heart-wrenching scale with, I think, 30 locations that people can receive services in the city of Boston. In July, our staff at Groundworks and many of our participants were treated to an afternoon with Dr. Jim O'Connell, who came up and really generously spent a lot of time with us and allowed us to ask what seemed like thousands of questions about his 30+ years in this work. It was a really enriching experience for so many of us on our team, many of whom are huge fans of the Rough Sleepers book. Tracy Kidder graduated from Harvard and studied at the University of Iowa. He has won the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award, the Robert F. Kennedy Award, and many other literary prizes. His other books include The Soul of a New Machine, House, Among School Children, Old Friends, Hometown, My Detachment, Strength in What Remains, and with Richard Todd, Good Prose. Tracy Kidder's book, Mountains Beyond Mountains, about the inspiring work of Dr. Paul Farmer, which I read in my first year anthropology class at Smith College, made me choose a track in medical anthropology and inspired my subsequent work as an HIV prevention volunteer in the Peace Corps. So I'm grateful and a really big fan. I'm equally honored to introduce Robbie Gamble, whose poems have appeared in the Atlanta Review, Poet Lore, Rhino, Spillway, and The Sun, among others. His essays have appeared in Mass Poetry, Pangarus, I hope I'm saying that right, Scoundrel Time, Solstice, and Tahoma Literary Review. Recipient of the Carve Poetry Prize and a Peter Taylor Fellowship at the Kenyon Summer Writers Workshop, Robbie holds an MFA from Lesley University. He serves as the poetry editor for Solstice, a magazine of diverse voices. Robbie worked for 20 years as a nurse practitioner at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, and he now lives locally here in Vermont. I had the privilege of showing Robbie around at Groundworks a few weeks ago to learn a bit more about our healthcare for the homeless model here in town. Groundworks Collaborative, together with our partners at Brattleboro Memorial Hospital, the Brattleboro Retreat, and HCRS, which is our local community mental health agency, is home to the first ACT team here in the state of Vermont. ACT, thank you. ACT stands for Assertive Community Treatment. It's an evidence-based model that provides an inpatient level of health and mental health care to individuals who are experiencing homelessness or who have recently experienced homelessness, with services delivered in an outpatient and even street-level basis. The team consists of medical, social work, and peer support service lines that offer comprehensive services delivered in our shelters, in people's homes, could be in a park or even in the woods. A nurse practitioner and a therapist might go together to treat a wound and offer psychotherapy to a patient in the same visit. A case manager might go together with an outreach nurse to administer medication or to line up an appointment with a specialist. A peer support advocate might accompany a psychiatrist to work with someone on considering taking a new medication. It's a parallel healthcare system that's available only to people who are connected to Groundworks Collaborative, perhaps through our drop-in center or overnight shelter, perhaps someone who is living in a motel in Brattleboro, perhaps someone who is one of the many people unsheltered on the streets of Brattleboro today. So I will stick around afterward if you have any questions about Groundworks or our HealthWorks or our HealthWorks Act team. Please come and see me, and I will also be at the 2 follow-up roundtable discussions. Those are scheduled for Monday, October 23rd, and Wednesday, November 8th, both at Brooks Memorial Library from 7 to 8:30 p.m. So for now, I welcome Tracy Kidder and Robbie Gamble. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, this one is, okay. Robbie asked me to read a bit from this book, starting at the beginning, but I won't go all the way through. This is the first chapter. This is called The Van. Around 10 on a warm September night, the outreach van stopped in the kind of South Boston neighborhood said to be in transition. On one side of the street was a new apartment building, its windows glowing, its sidewalks lit by artful imitations of old-fashioned street lamps. On the other side, in murky light, stood an abandoned loading dock. A heap of blankets lay on the concrete platform. Someone passing by wouldn't have known they were anything but discarded blankets. But when the driver of the van walked up the steps and spoke to them, saying he was doing a wellness check, a muffled voice came back from underneath. "Fuck you, get the fuck out of here." The driver turned away and shrugged to Dr. Jim O'Connell, who was standing at the bottom of the steps. "Let me try," the doctor said, and he climbed up to the platform and knelt by the gray mound. "Hey, Johnny, it's Jim O'Connell. I haven't seen you in a long time. I just want to make sure you're all right." An earthquake in the blankets, then an eruption, tangled hair and a bright red face, and a loud voice saying in a Boston accent, "Dr. Jim, how the fuck are you?" For the next half hour, Johnny reminisced about the alcohol-fueled adventures of his past, about mutual old friends, mostly dead. The doctor listened, laughing now and then. He reminded Johnny that the street clinic was still open on Thursdays at Mass General. Johnny should come, that is, if he wanted to come. Dr. Jim, James Joseph O'Connell, had been riding on the outreach van for 3 decades. During those years, he had built, with many friends and colleagues, a large medical organization, which he called the Program, short for the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless Program. It now had 400 employees and looked after about 11,000 homeless people a year. Jim was its president and also captain of the street team, a small piece of the program with 8 members serving several hundred homeless people who shunned the city's many shelters and lived mainly outside or in makeshift quarters. About half of Jim's administrative work now lay in managing the street team, and all of his clinical work went to doctoring its patients, Boston's rough sleepers, as Jim liked to call them, borrowing the British term from the 19th century. The van was a crucial tool for reaching those patients. It was financed by the state and managed by the Pine Street Inn, Boston's largest homeless shelter. Nowadays, 2 vans went out from the inn each night. They had become an institution which Jim had helped to foster in the late 1980s. Back then, he used to ride 3 nights a week, usually until dawn. Now he went out only on Monday nights and got off around midnight. When Jim had begun these tours on the van through Boston's nighttime streets, he had imagined the world of rough sleepers as a chaos. But it turned out that most of them had territories where they hung around and panhandled during the day. Stemming was the street term, its etymology obscure. For sleeping, they had favorite doorways, park benches, alleys, understories of bridges, ATM parlors. Rough sleepers were like homebodies without homes. At the start of a ride, Jim and the driver's assistant would trade the names of people they were worried about, and they would usually find each of them within an hour or 2. Jim was like a 1950s doctor making house calls. though the van rarely dispensed more than minor medicine. Rather, it was meant for bringing food and blankets and socks and underwear to rough sleepers, and more urgently, for finding people in distress and bringing them in, if they would come, to hospital emergency rooms or the city's homeless shelters. The van was also a tool for keeping in touch with patients and their ailments and collecting the unpublished news of the streets. Like all members of his street team, Jim carried a small knapsack, his doctor's bag, its contents refined and miniaturized over the years. It consisted mostly of basic first aid gear and diagnostic equipment. A blood pressure cuff that wrapped around the wrist, a little pulse oximeter, an ear thermometer, a simple blood glucose meter, a stethoscope. Among the losses he regretted was the pint bottle of whiskey that he once carried for the times when a patient was in alcohol withdrawal and on the verge of seizure. You couldn't do that now, he says. It's become a moral issue. He wore his cell phone in a holster on his hip, and he carried a small flashlight, thin enough to hold in his teeth if he needed both hands to examine a patient. A flashlight remained one of the street team's essential tools for checking on rough sleepers. Some years back, one patient had asked how Dr. Jim would feel if his doctor came to his bedroom in the middle of the night and woke him up by shining a flashlight in his face. Jim took the issue to the program's board of directors, a group of about 16, which included experts in health and medicine and finance and several formerly homeless people. The board convened a meeting of about 30 rough sleepers who issued this advice, long since become policy. The wellness checks should continue, but when they woke people up late at night, Jim and his street team should first shine their flashlights on their own faces so as not to startle the patients. The van stops under streetlights on Bromfield Street, not far from Boston Common. It's like a small bus with several rows of seats, mostly occupied by boxes of blankets, underwear, and socks. In the rear, there's a small canteen with boxes of sandwiches and condiments, vats of hot chocolate, coffee, and soup. Jim gets out, opens the back doors, and looks around for customers. He has a ruddy face and silver hair that falls almost to his collar and over the tops of his ears. He wears light-colored corduroy pants, a collared shirt, and clogs. He's 6 feet tall and trim and moves with an athlete's self-assurance that makes a task look easy, and his voice is full of energy and cheer as he waits on the customers at the back of the van. A thin black man comes wandering into the light out of an alley. "You got soup?" he asks. "Yes," says Jim, grabbing a styrofoam cup and filling it from one of the vats. "You got crackers to go with it?" "Sure. Isn't there a doctor who goes with you guys?" "I'm a doctor," says Jim. Then he introduces himself, offering his hand. "I want to change my doctor," says the man. "I hear good things about you." "We'd be happy to take care of you. We'd be delighted." We'd be thrilled. The man should come to street clinic this Thursday, Jim says, adding that it's held at Mass General, the gigantic Massachusetts General Hospital, not far away, near the banks of the Charles River. The van makes many stops. It encounters a mixture of people. There seem to be about half as many women as men, and lone women are rare, almost certainly because the streets at night are especially dangerous for them. There are many black faces, but far fewer than white ones, and this is surprising. Homelessness afflicts black and Latino people disproportionately, both in the United States and in Boston, and one might expect that the same would be true of the city's rough sleepers. Jim has long worried that the van and other outreach efforts have consistently missed rough sleepers of color, and yet most of the van's drivers and their helpers are themselves black and Latino. Over the years, they have often searched for their own in the nighttime city. Maybe, Jim thinks, the black and Latino communities are more willing than Boston's white world to harbor their homeless. In any case, once people have fallen to living on the streets, they have reached a certain horrible equality. A young-looking white woman comes into the light on Washington Street, hopping on one foot and then the other, running her hands through matted strawberry blonde hair, all the while feverishly scratching her arms and neck and face. "That's what people will do on K2, Jim says softly as the woman approaches. K2 is synthetic marijuana, which has notoriously unpredictable effects. Her voice is loud and high. "Holy shit, I got lice. I was exposed to lice and I'm freaking out. Or I already got all the treatment, somebody stole it." Where did you get the treatment, Jim asks. I bought the shit at CVS and somebody stole $100 worth of friggin' lice removal shit. I got court tomorrow. My mother's sick in the hospital dying and I need to go see her, but I'm not gonna go there and expose people. A lot of chicks have them and don't tell. He moves closer to her, glancing at her collar as she speaks, looking for lice. Scabies get under your skin, he'll explain later. Lice feed on your skin, but live in your clothing. If she had lice, they'd have been on her collar. He doesn't see any bugs there, but he never argues in cases like this, where the patient seems delusional. Instead, he makes her an offer, phrasing it provisionally, in an even-handed tone. Do you want to go to one of the shelters where they can do the treatment, or no? She says she has to see about something else first, but adds, thank you, sir. My name is Jim O'Connell. I'm a doctor, actually. So nice to meet you. Let us know if you want to come in. He smiles. How about some nice hot soup? No. How about some hot chocolate? Yes. Hey, what kind of sandwiches do you guys have? His voice and attention seem to have calmed her. She begins to tell him some of her life story. It includes an attempted rape, which has left her with a damaged shoulder. Mind if I have a look? She does not, and holding her shoulder with one hand, he gently moves her upper arm in several directions. It isn't dislocated or separated, he tells her, but if she wants a better evaluation, she should come to the Mass General Street Clinic this Thursday. He writes down the phone number of the van in case she decides to go to the shelter tonight. The pull of the streets is a phrase that Jim and his team have used to explain to themselves why many of their patients leave detoxes and hospitals before their course of treatment is finished, leave AMA against medical advice. Jim says he still feels drawn to these rides, partly because of the relative simplicity of the city's nighttime streets, when everything else has gone away and it's just you and the people here. The van moves on. Jim stares out the windows at the woman sitting on cardboard under a streetlight, drinking her hot chocolate, eating her sandwich. He adds, there's something about the van that keeps you riding on it. It's never quite the same. It's always a little different. And I'll stop there. Yeah, we had to change positions before we rose to this exalted state.
Yes, the sight lines are better up here. Thank you, Tracy. I love that opening in the book because it paints such a great picture of what the street team does, and you know. Is that better? Oh, okay. I need to really lean into it. Okay, ice cream cone. Thanks. I love that opening passage because it really paints such a vivid picture of what the street team in particular does, and the character of Jim and how he relates to the folks that he cares for. And I was riffling through the book over the last couple days, and just remembering all the times when the clinicians would be at the end of the day, we'd be in a break room or in a car somewhere, just talking about, I can't believe what I saw today or the stories that I heard, and like, this is the great American novel. Like somebody, like, we should write the great American novel. But then you did it, and it's not fiction. It's reality. So thank you for this book. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you came into this project, and also just how the project changed you over time.
Sure. I was writing about someone else, and a Boston entrepreneur, actually, the guy who founded kayak.com, and he had a lot of money, burning some holes in his pockets, and he was really interested in homelessness in Boston. Everyone told him, if you want to know about it, you got to meet this guy, Jim O'Connell. He was invited out on the van for a ride, and I tagged along. And I was astonished pretty quickly. It was, first of all, just the relations between this Harvard-educated doctor and these people who were, arguing with statues in parks and sitting on benches. A great variety of people, really. But it was the warmth of the relationships. Here they are. These people are joking, laughing, with their doctor, they're just talking like regular people. And to be honest, up until then, I'd really seldom talked to such people, and I think there's a definite reluctance on part of some Americans anyway to even look homeless people in the eye. It partly has to do, I suppose, with guilt, but also that sense that these people are incurably primitive or even alien, as my wife once put it, because and then you think about it. Well, think about the things that they haven't been endowed with, the ability to clean up an apartment once they get in it, for instance. So all sorts of things like that. But also the fact that, how do you, even if you really want to keep yourself clean, as many of the people I got to know did, how do you do it in a city like Boston, which has almost no public bathrooms? And for that reason, I think, it's easy enough just to dismiss such people, but not if you not only if you see them from the corner of your eye. If you look at them directly, what you have to acknowledge is the fact, and you talk to them, is that they're every bit as human as you and I, and if you when you get to know them, you're likely to not like some and to like others, but you have to admit that they're all just walking around with the most complex structure in the known universe on their shoulders. And what I began to discover was through Jim and his team was a pretty rich assortment of humanity, really interesting to me, and generally tragic, I must say.
There's a phrase in the book that I love where you talk about Jim's knack for pre-admiration, and that he sort of going into a relationship, that meeting somebody who might be kind of scary looking or really smelly or psychotic, but saying, I don't know this person yet, but there's something about this person that I'm going to like, and it may take me a while to find what that is, but that sort of presupposition that I want to admire the humanity in this other person, and that's something that I think really is the program is steeped in, and it really helped me in my relationships with patients to sort of start from there and work forward.
It came from a doctor you probably knew, Stefan Curtis.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant guy. He was greatly amused and interested in Jim. And he said, this pre-admiration, he said, I've never seen anyone do it the way Jim did, but, it is possible to do. And he said, I tried to incorporate it in my practice. Yeah,
it's just a human practice. In any relationship, start from there and learn stuff.
It's hard. It's kind of hard for misanthropes to do. But anyway.
Well, if you have a list of instructions, it can help. I just have some prompts to kind of do things. So we must have overlapped it over the time that you wrote this book. But I worked mostly, at that point I was mostly working in the inpatient at Barbara McGinnis House, the respite center. Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program has a 108-bed respite center.
104.
Is it 104? Yeah. Well, there's the spillover. The day rooms are almost always have some extra beds. You probably know the figures better than I do. So I was mostly working with folks when they were injured or too ill to be out on the streets. They would come in and we would care for them. And they didn't need full 24/7 hospital care, but we had round-the-clock nursing, and I'm a nurse practitioner, so I would see 13 to 15 patients every day. But I'm sure we crossed paths and we knew some of the mutual patients. But I didn't know about the project, and you have this ability, I think, to sort of be incredibly unobtrusive. So we weren't aware of your presence.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
And I think, as somebody writing nonfiction, I think that's a real gift to be able to sort of be present in a room, but your presence isn't affecting the room. And I wondered if you could sort of talk about that as a practice, as a writer.
Well, it's a good goal. I'm not as good at that as I ought to be. Because we were often in the dark, I recorded a lot of what Jim and others said to me with their knowledge.
Yes.
because it's hard to write it down. And going back through those recordings and transcribing them, I can't tell you how many times I've thought, saying to myself, "Shut up, stop it," which is sort of my tendency. The great thing that I've had as a writer ever since I got lucky, and so that I could make a living doing this is time. I have this great luxury of time that a lot of nonfiction writers, certainly daily journalists, don't have.
Right.
And so, after a while, people get used to your being around, and it doesn't seem like a big deal anymore, I think, to them. So that's basically all there is to that. It's no great.
Just sort of disappear. I remember there was a scene in House, which is very memorable, where there's this argument between the contractor and the architect and the homeowner that's very heated and it's sort of like this pivotal point in the book, which I read it years ago and I've always loved that scene. And it's clear that you're there, but they couldn't. You're utterly invisible to them. And
I think so at that time. I don't know. You can't be sure. But. I mean, my smart-ass way of saying that is, I don't know what happened. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't been there, because I wasn't there when I wasn't there.
Right. Yeah.
The thing is, though, it seems like that when something awful is happening in front of you, and this was often true with the research with this book. I have a double set of feelings, which is this is awful, and at the same time, this is good material. And that's a little worrisome morally, I guess, but it is the way it is, and it does give me a certain amount of insulation. I don't know if you probably know better than I do, but many people wonder how do people working for healthcare for the homeless, particularly on the street team. I mean, just to give you a quick horrifying statistic, the people who sleep in the shelters in Boston, who use shelters mostly as their homes, die at a rate of about 4 times that of their counterparts in the general population. People who are living on the street die at about 12 to 14 times the death rate of, at a rate about that compared to their counterparts. And so one of the things on the street team that you have to deal with constantly is just this. You get to know people really well. You do everything. They do everything they can to prolong lives, to enrich their lives. And by and large, I mean, I think Jim would say this, they have not ever managed to inflect this death curve. And so, as a result, it's full of sadness, that job. And also tremendous joy. As some people would say, it's the best job in the world some days, and others it's the worst. But what they have is each other. In the team, and also among the homeless patients. I remember talking to Jim about this once, and sometimes he would talk about joy in this work, and I really was curious what he meant. I know he didn't mean, joy is not the same as happiness, obviously. And he said, I think it was hard for him to say it. He just said, sometimes he'd just say, I just know that there is joy. But one time he said, it's a system of friends. And that's where the joy comes from, I think. And he said that apropos also of saying that in medical school we were taught to be friendly but not a friend. He said if we tried to do that with this population, we'd have gotten nowhere. And I think it was generally his inclination anyway, to go around pre-admiring everybody, even his adversaries.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great, and it's interesting. The death rates. I mean, sometimes it would feel like shoveling against the tide. And when I started with the program, the biggest killer was HIV. And I mean, when the antiretrovirals were just beginning to come around, and so the death rates for the homeless folks with HIV was incredibly high. And we worked for a decade to get people onto meds and case management to help them to follow up, and so that rate just fell off and fell off and fell off. But somebody did a study. I don't know. It might have actually been Stefan Cortez who did it. It was a brilliant study. At the same time that those death rates were falling off, the death rate from overdoses on opiates was rising almost symmetrically. So the death rate remained, if you looked at sort of across, just without looking at cause across that time frame, it didn't change at all. In spite of, and we did all this work, and then the opiate crisis became what it became.
Oddly though, Robbie, the main cause of death among all of the patients, that all these 11,000 patients, has been cancer.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just now because of fentanyl. Those two are just about at the same level. I mean, it's it's.
And we would have people who came in, and they had tumors that had been untreated for years that were sort of beyond really good treatment, and then you're just doing palliative care.
But that was more early on, right, than later.
Yeah.
But I mean, just go back to that. Is it necessary? I mean, the fact that they haven't been able to invert this death curve does not make the program useless. Certainly not in my opinion. I mean, some of it is like palliative care, but the amount of misery, sheer volume of misery that this effort has relieved is staggering. And wonderful. And Jim will often get grilled as to how are we going to end all this? We Americans we want a quick answer for everything. And there isn't a quick one for this. It's really a symptom of a huge number of problems. But the real answer is, this, as Jim said once to me, and it kind of irritated, I guess, with some of my questions, this is what we do while we're waiting for the world to change. Mm-hmm. And for the moment, I think it's really absolutely necessary. In fact, I'm pretty sure, I can't do this with numbers, but that the patients of Boston Healthcare for the Homeless are getting better health care for free than most residents of Boston. And I don't think it's not bad on the homeless. I don't want to see it that the homeless population get less good health care, but I do think this says something about medicine, and I do think that this program also has things to teach mainstream medicine about the length of visits and so on and so forth. I mean, we are descending, I think, into a kind of nightmare of corporate medicine where efficiency is the only thing that counts. Efficiency and money are the only two things that count. Never mind satisfaction with your medical condition, with your health care. I'm sorry, I'm digressing. But I do think it's quite a wonderful thing to see doctors able and willing to take and nurse practitioners and physicians assistants and nurses too, take the time that's necessary and that's just not the norm in a lot of places anymore.
Well, that's the resource that time is. It's interesting to hear you talk about as a nonfiction writer, having the time is what makes it possible to do what you do, and certainly working with. Clinically, when you're presented with a homeless person, it's not just that they have a broken leg because they were hit by a bus. They have psychiatric issues and addiction issues. I mean, there's layers and layers and layers, and you can't deal with a wound or a high blood sugar without kind of looking at that whole piece, and that takes time, and insurance reimbursement doesn't allow for that, and so we had to just push and push and push against the Medicaid and Medicare and the insurers to say, look, in order for us to do what we do, we need to make time. And
I wanted to add to that whole thing. There are people who I've heard say this, and just that these people don't deserve this. Why should they? And what I finally come to realize is that the word deserve really doesn't belong in medicine anywhere. Anyway, there's a great line in Hamlet, in Shakespeare's Hamlet, where Shakespeare asks the old idiot Polonius to treat these actors who are coming to the court well. And Polonius says, well, he'll treat them according to their deserts. And Hamlet says, oh, God's bodykin, man, much better. Treat them according to your own honor and dignity. And, the best thing he says is that if we treated everyone according to his deserts, who would escape whipping? And I think we have to think about that. In any case, I just wanted to say that it's not a question of what people deserve, when you're out on, certainly when you're dealing with a homeless population, it's what they need. But if you really wanted to get down to questions of what they deserve, or to think about what they didn't get as children, one of the elderly psychiatrists that was on the street team, one of them, when I first got there, one of the psychiatrists who had been doing this for a long time, said he estimated that of his patients, at least 75% had suffered severe trauma as children. Jim thought the number was quite a bit higher, or somewhat higher anyway. And I can tell you story after story of people who never had a chance, really never had a chance. And, you know, so you know, I think one has to sort of assume that there are, not sort of, but has to assume that there are good reasons why people are out there. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. That's so true. So the book is, I mean, the primary focus of the book is Jim as a person and then the organization that he built out. But you have there's this wonderful character of Tony Colombo that appears in the story and has an extraordinary narrative arc. And I just was curious if, was that something that you were looking for when you took on this project, or did he just emerge and you went with it, or do you sort of look for characters like that to trail after when you're writing?
Oh, it's sort of both. I mean, he emerged. Jim, he was someone who really interested Jim, in one of the very first office visits that I was allowed.
Oh, interesting.
With the patient's permission was with him, and right away, I knew, oh my, this guy's really interesting. But I was also looking for. You know, I wanted to give you the sense of a large contingent of patients, but at the same time, I didn't want you to get lost in the names, you know. And so I was hoping for someone like this, I guess. It's hard to know. I mean, one of the things you have to do if you're going to do this job, this wonderful job that I've had, is what a friend of mine called, you have to have the willingness to be surprised. It's fine if you go in with all kinds of preconceived notions, but you have to be delighted when you have to be willing to be delighted when you find out you were wrong. Anyway, I found him really fascinating and poignant in a really powerful way. Yeah. He's one of those people who never really had a chance. He didn't surrender this information until very late in the game, but he had been abused by a priest for quite a long time, pretty hideously, of course. And he, you know, grown up in violence and so on. And he'd committed a pretty bad crime, gone to jail for a better part of 20 years. And he'd say 20 years, as someone once put it. They always round up. I think it was 18 years. But and now he was trying to rejoin the society, and he was trying to do it through Jim. He was trying to make himself Jim's understudy, and Jim was happy to try to let him do that. He was taking care of, he was protecting, he was a great, huge, powerful man. And he was trying to protect the vulnerable, the weakest of his fellow rough sleepers, among other things. And he was brilliant. He was completely uneducated, almost completely, but very, very smart. I'll stop there.
Well, I think he was an incredible voice. I mean, he's articulated so much of, you know, what it was like to live on the streets and to chase a high and to, you know, just all the inner workings of those communities, because they really are rich communities with their own culture. And it's brilliant that he sort of gave you a window into those workings.
It was really interesting. Yes, it's like. I mean, he could make a call to someone who was stemming downtown to try to find someone else. And they, you know, it was like, you get this feeling that there's a mycelium under the streets of the city.
That's a great image. Yeah. I also had the opportunity to work briefly with Partners in Health and knew Paul Farmer a little bit, you know, and Mountains Beyond Mountains is another wonderful look at a brilliant physician who also built a groundbreaking organization. And I was just wondering, I mean, because you've spent time with both Jim and Paul, if you could, this is so high school teachery, but if you could do like a little compare and contrast of,
sure.
of the two great, of the two of them.
Happy to do that, actually. They're very different.
Yeah.
And I think the essence, I can explain the essence of the difference in the fact that both men have been routinely accused of being saints. And Jim really hates it.
Oh God, he hates
it. He thinks it, in part because he doesn't believe it's true, but also in part because he knows that it's kind of a way of saying, well, what you do is something that we can't expect anyone else to do. You know, it's just sort of. Paul, on the other hand, really liked being called a saint. And God knows maybe he was. I don't really know what a saint is. So we think of, but he and Jim knew each other. I have a wonderful picture of them when I was in the hospital, and both of them came to visit on the same day as it happened. So I have a wonderful picture of the two of them. And I think and I know Paul really respected Jim, and I think I know Jim respected Paul. It's hard to know exactly how Jim feels about almost anything, but, well, that's not quite true, but about many things. But Paul and he used to sometimes end up on a panel together. And Paul would customarily say, poor Jim, he never got more than a mile away from where he went to medical school. But sometime after that, as the lecture went on, Paul would say, but you know, he deals here in Boston, in the shadow of these great medical institutions, he deals with exactly what I deal with in Haiti, in Rwanda, and throughout sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America. And I dare say that's true. It is. I mean, there are differences, of course. In some ways, it may be worse. It's the W.E.B. Du Bois line about to be a poor man is terrible anywhere, but to be poor in a land of dollars is the worst of all. So it's a really humiliating condition to be homeless in this country.
Oh, I'm happy to let you roll on. So I feel very much. I've seen you, talk do these conversations with Jim, and I feel like I'm a very sort of watered down version of Jim sitting here. I was just a frontline work clinician. But I know that in your readings and presentations, there's in the Q&A part of things, the question always comes up. Also, what is the solution to this problem? And it's nice to sort of preemptively head that off by talking about it.
Yeah. Well, I think I've heard Jim so many times on this subject, and he's given it enormous thought, and I tried to give it some. I tried to sketch in my book some of the, pretty briefly, some of what is going on. And my general feeling is, this is, to be realistic, this problem isn't going to be solved today or anytime soon, but look at all the good things that are being done. And there are a lot of really good and wonderful efforts. But no one will be synoptic. I don't think there's any one solution to a problem that is in part caused, I suppose primarily caused by a lack of decent affordable housing. And just to pause on that for a second, it's not enough just to have affordable housing. We know, for instance, from a wonderful epidemiological study of Boston, that if you go from, it used to be the case anyway, if you went from Charles Street Station on the T to Mattapan, you could shed 30 years of life expectancy. So bad housing can be almost as bad as being homeless, or as lethal anyhow. And I mean badly situated, lack of security, so on and so forth. But that is the main problem, right? And somebody once said, though, that it's a little bit like a game of musical chairs. And the people least likely to be able to compete are the ones that are going to be left standing. And I think that's generally the case. We have, when Jim gets asked what one thing he would do if he could to end homelessness, he talks about education and wanting to invest vast sums in making it better. I tend to think, if you could find a way to end child abuse, that would be my one thing. But there are so many things that have to be done. And in one of the lectures I heard him give, he talked about this as a prism. The homelessness itself as like a prism that you hold up in front of the country, and it refracts all the really deep flaws that we have, you know, in the criminal justice system, in the foster care system, which is really a big one, in education, and in mental health. I mean, we don't have a mental health system. Mental health, by the way, I mean, not all homeless people are mentally ill, although I suppose that being homeless long enough could give you some real problems, some real psychological problems. It's not, and it's not the cause of modern homelessness. It was a complicating factor added to it, the closing, the deinstitutionalization. But it is a big issue, and it's a much bigger issue than just with homelessness. So there's an awful lot that really needs to be fixed. And if the country were willing to look at this problem or set of problems as warning, you know, or as symptoms, and that we want to take care of, that would be great. We'd be a better country if we solved homelessness. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but I don't want to declare despair on behalf of some people who are so much more unfortunate than I am.
Yeah, when I step back and look at things from 30,000 feet, I really try to think about sort of values and where our values lie, where our interests lie, and I mean just the idea that healthcare is a right and not a privilege, and it's so clear right now that it's a privilege, and it's tied to your so often to your workplace or your income level. And who in society do we value? I mean, is sports stars and entertainers as opposed to nurses and civil engineers and teachers and social workers? I mean, the people that really kind of make stuff happen when they're or sort stuff out when they're falling apart. I mean, and why? Who gets the salaries? Where does the money go? I remember when I was in nursing school, this one professor who said, you need to know where does the money go and where does it not go, and you will learn if you think about that and follow those paths, you will learn so much about what's working and what isn't. And I think homeless folks are kind of the canary in the coal mine because so much falls on them.
I think that's true. I think if I spent even longer, and I spent twice as long on this book as I had on any other. It was partly because I found it so compelling, traveling around with these people. And it wasn't just Jim. There were wonderful people on that street team. But I think if I spent long enough, I'd probably become a Marxist. Maybe I have. I don't know.
It's a temptation, yeah. At least in healthcare, right?
That street team was a wonderful group. One of the most buoyant people I've ever known was what was called the recovery coach. He was a guy in his 50s, I guess, and he'd gotten addicted to drugs in the Navy, and he'd had about a 20-year adventure with them that was pretty horrifying. And he'd stopped, and he'd really gotten really straight and stayed that way. But he took care of people who had basically was taking care of people who had the same problems that he'd had. And he was wonderful. I mean, he said, I count, how do you say, I count sobriety in hours. And so people relapse. That's okay. He'd say things like, well, so she relapsed, but now she's learned what it's like to be sober. She's not going to like drinking anymore. I remember my favorite one, if I could find it in my, it's probably too hard to find, is what he called button-down shirt moments. He'd had one of his patients was about to be, or one of his special people was about to get housed. A guy had been housed quite a few times for, I don't know why it had fallen on him, but and he'd failed many times again and again. But this time, before he was getting housed, he told the recovery coach that he wanted some button-down shirts. And he said, button-down shirts. He said, never asked me for that before. He said, I'm going to think he's going to make it this time. And he said, I'm having a button-down shirt moment. he just didn't give up, you know. And he'd go to court for patients, argue with the judge. It's really great. And they had, it goes on and on.
Well, that's the thing. Is sometimes patients surprise us. I mean, I've had a number of people who they just seem so chronically like in this cycle of addiction, and they come in to detox and they go back out, and they come in when they were injured and we detox and they'd go back out, and it's just and you think, oh, this is not going well. And then I remember this one woman in particular. She lived in Copley Square by the library on the Greats, and she had a boyfriend who would beat her up, and like she would leave, she would get really drunk, come in, detox, and go back to him. And we thought, this is just not ending well. And then one time she came in, she had this wound on her hand that required a little more, she required some surgery. And so she stayed with us. She managed to kind of focus on that and stay with us a little bit longer than she might have otherwise. And all of a sudden she's like, wow. Like, screw Copley Square, I'm not going out. And like she stayed put, and we were able to get a plan. She moved out to Worcester or somewhere else and got away from the crowd. And she was like, if you had asked, if you'd given me a roster of people and said, who do you think is going to get out of this cycle in the next year, she would have been the last person I'd have chosen. So you just never, and you have to approach it with that kind of button-down shirt optimism, like maybe this is the time. It's sort of Jim's pre-admiration.
Well, yeah, and it does happen. I mean, all the time. One of my favorite stories, I didn't know this person, was the guy who was, Jim's wife, Jill, was a nurse practitioner, and she was trying to help this guy. She said he was drunk all the time. He even drank shampoo. But they put him they got him housed, and it was in Brookline, and he decided to avail himself of all of the public facilities available in that wealthy town. And I mean, he became a model citizen. It was fascinating. He kept a whole. He was sort of. He became kind of a. What would you call it? He had frogs in a bowl, I guess, in his shower and so on. And he became a member of the board of Healthcare for the Homeless. And my favorite person, whom I did get to know quite well, a woman named Joanne Guarino, who went through awful childhood and with lots of sexual abuse and so on, and was on the streets for, I guess, the better part of 30 years, and had become very ill with AIDS and rheumatoid arthritis, which wasn't caused by that, but some heart problems. But she just got out of it. And she got out of it, she would say, because of Jim and all the other practitioners at Healthcare for the Homeless. And now she's on the board, and every year she gives a talk to the brand new students at Harvard Medical School. And she closes that talk every year with the same line, roughly, which is, "Don't be a shithead doctor." There are lots and lots of success stories. It's just that they vastly outnumber the others. But from my perspective, standing back, almost all were success stories in one way or another. Their lives have been immeasurably improved including Tony's.
Yeah.
Well,
we have this sort of the mantra of harm reduction. I mean, just wherever. I mean, if it takes 6 months going out on the van and giving somebody a sandwich, and just engaging in a brief conversation to build up trust, and then maybe you can get their blood pressure, and get them on one medication, or if you can get them to come in one time into the clinic to get something, that's a huge victory. We don't sort of measure things in the same way, and if there's 2 steps back after, then the 1 step forward is a victory.
I don't know if there's much time left. Any questions? Do we have time for questions?
How are we doing for time? We have time for questions. Okay, I'll be the Phil Donahue guy with the microphone.
Hey, don't hurt yourself.
I won't.
Thank you very much. I'm just curious to know, how do you know when to stop reporting?
How to stop? How to know when?
Yeah.
I had an editor for 47 years, wonderful man named Richard Todd, and he died in the middle of this project, unfortunately, as I sometimes say, very inconsiderate of him. But he used to tell me when to stop. So I don't exactly know. Maybe that's why this took 6 years instead of 3. But I think you get a sense of it. I mostly research and then write, but I do both sometimes. And you can start to tell when you've got what you feel you need. And in this case, there was the pandemic really put a stop to it. I wasn't able to go in because I have an autoimmune thing, and Jim had acquired one, so we'd just talk on the phone. And then when we were all vaccinated, I went back, but that was sort of over, and I guess it was kind of clear, but it's never really obvious. You could go on forever, one could. I have some friends, really good writers, 2 of them I'm thinking of, who really hate writing. I mean, or not that they hate it, but they find it very difficult to do. If they didn't have someone to tell them to stop, they would never stop. Yes, sir. Oh. Sorry.
I wonder, of all the books that you've written, I've read quite a few, if any of the main characters, if one of them most reminds you of your own self, your own work. I'm thinking about the way that you just captured, I didn't read this book yet, but the way you captured what he brought to his patients, the subtlety, the way he was able to check that woman's shoulder. It's a brilliant way that you very subtly help us feel something. And the doctor also did something really subtly. So I saw that kind of as a mirror. And I wonder if you have any resonance with any of your characters. Well,
I think almost all of them I've liked, in one way or another. In fact, I think that's true. I never wanted, I took it as a project long ago to try to write about virtue. But I don't think of myself, the only character that really reminds me of myself is in a book I wrote called My Detachment, which is a little bit of a memoir about myself as a soldier in Vietnam. But I hesitate to, I mean, I think we all have these things in common, and I try to imagine what it would be like to be that person. I think the person I have the least in common with is probably Paul Farmer, although, which is not to say I didn't admire him and don't miss him now, but this guy was amazing. He was hyper articulate. He was probably probably the smartest person I've ever known. Although Jim's wonderful. He has this wonderful assistant, probably the most overqualified anywhere, who once said to me, "He's so smart, and he hides it so well." Yes, you've been waiting back here. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, he's been waiting. Yeah, they both have. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoy your work over the years. If you had 5 minutes with Matt Gaetz or Marjorie Taylor Greene or Jim Jordan, what would you tell them about the problem with homelessness as you experienced it?
Without raising my voice?
Yeah. Well, why don't you use pre-admiration?
I'd use pre-admiration. I don't know what I would. I mean, maybe... Are they religious? Maybe it'd be there but for the grace of God, go you and I, or something like that. I'm not sure what I'd say. You know, there might be someone in their family though, who many people have. I know from just. I wish I had a really cool answer, but I don't. I don't know what I'd do. I think I'd probably at this point just as soon avoid those two.
I've been a fan of yours for many years, and the first book of yours that I read was Old Friends. And it was when my mom moved into a memory care unit. So the book really resonated with me. I was very touched by it. My question is, a lot of young writers, aspiring writers, struggle with what medium or what venue or genre to write in. And you know, your medium is literary nonfiction. In my view, you're a master at it. No one does it better than Tracy Kidder, in my opinion. How did you decide to pursue literary nonfiction as your writing genre?
Well, I had wanted to be a novelist. I conceived of this ambition when I was in college, and somehow it stuck with me through the Army and Vietnam. But I found myself, I went to the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop. It was I got a little sinecure there, and it was a refuge, partly from my family who wanted, I had an uncle who'd gotten me a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. And anyway, I wanted to write, but the well from which I'd drawn for fiction seemed to dry up. There was at the time at Iowa a man who was proselytizing what was called the new journalism then. It wasn't really new, of course, and I started reading pretty widely in it, from George Orwell to John McPhee, who I think is the real master, the most elegant of the, one of the most elegant writers of our era. And Orwell was wonderful. There were, anyway, so I just started doing it, trying to do it. I did some local stories in Iowa City. And I don't know, I can't really explain. It just seemed like something I could do that wasn't, I was in really fast company out there. I once went back and just looked at what my classmates and the people around that time at Iowa had done, and there were so many Pulitzers and National Book Awards and Guggenheims and you name it. And it was a kind of terrifying place to be. It was because you'd have these workshops, and the students and the teacher would read what you'd written, and the students would comment on them. And these workshops were often like inquisitions. I was doing something different. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was just kind of rank cowardice. But I got to really liking it. And now as I look back, what a wonderful thing to have been allowed to, privilege to have gone out and satisfied my idle curiosity and made a living at it. And I've met some really great, really wonderful people along the way. Some not so wonderful too, of course. But anyway, that's sort of what happened. But I can't, once sometimes you go down a road and you look back and you cannot figure out how you got there. It's kind of that way sometimes. Maybe we better stop her.
I just wanted to circle back quickly to something you said about maybe there's somebody in their family.
Yeah.
And I just recalled when we opened up the new Barbara McGinnis house on Albany Street across in the old City Morgue building. That Dennis Eckersley, the Red Sox pitcher, came and spoke, Dennis had a brother, Wally, who was homeless for decades, who used to follow him around from baseball park to baseball park, just catching him for money and support. And I guess Wally eventually, he was an accomplice in some crime and ended up being incarcerated for a while. And then cleaned up and came out. But Dennis, I'll never forget what he said at this opening event. He said, the work that like for families of folks who are out in the streets, like we're no longer able to care for them. It gives us great comfort to know that there are people out there who are caring for them and engaging with them and keeping them human. And I've never, when the work gets hard, that really sort of helps to sustain me, because thinking about that there are families behind everybody and everybody has a history.
Right. Jim actually, Eckersley credits Jim with having helped immensely with his brother. So I think maybe we should end there, if that's all right.